Happy returns from the break. Chuck Mather here at Studio 310 at the Be Thou My Vision Radio Network Little Man's on the Prairie program. On the landline with me is the Reverend Jay Fluck, who's a bit of a church historian. Reverend Fluck hails from the Reformed Church in the United States, and he pastors in Pennsylvania. He was formerly the archivist of the RCUS as well, and I asked him to consider joining me on this program from time to time to give us some historical perspective in what we're going to call Discerning the Muck with Jay Fluck. What do you say, Jay? Tell us a little bit about some important dates in Reformational history.
I wonder what your opinion of the most important date or year in the Reformation is. Would it be the martyrdom of John Huss in 1415? Or maybe Martin Luther's theses nailed on the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral, October 31st, 1517? Or maybe the Leipzig debate, where in 1519 he debated Eck? Or maybe Luther's storm of tracts after that in 1520? Or maybe the Diet of Worms in 1521, where we got the statement from Luther, "Here I stand, God help me, I can stand nowhere else." Maybe you would prefer John Calvin's birth in 1509. Or maybe the first edition of the Institutes in 1536 and his first time in Geneva. Or maybe the invitation from the City Council of Geneva in 1541 that brought him back to Geneva, where his ministry really began. I have another date in mind. I wonder if you might have other dates in mind. And so take a minute and think about it. I'd like to suggest that the date for the most important year of the Reformation is 1492. And now the first thing you're going to have to do is get rid of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus is a result of 1492, just as Martin Luther is. You see, in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella expelled the last of the Moors from Spain. That was the conclusion of a 760-year-old civil war. You see, the Moors had invaded Spain in 711, conquered it in 718, and having conquered it, they consolidated their gains, and then determined that they were going to try to go into Europe. So they sent their army across the Pyrenees into what we would call France. There they met the warlord of the Merovingian dynasty of the Frankish kingdom, whose name was Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, for his penchant for using a war hammer. All day long in that battle, in 732, the Moorish cavalry, light cavalry as they were, charged against the Frankish shield wall and didn't break it. All day long. Finally got dark, everybody went home, had dinner, and went to bed. Next morning before dawn, the Franks got up, had mass said, and had their breakfast, and put the shield wall together, and by sunrise, they were in the shield wall waiting. By 10 o'clock the next morning, the Moors had not showed up. So Martel sent out scouts to look and see what was happening, and the scouts came back and reported that on the way back across the Pyrenees, there were clothes, and loot, food, and horses, and dead bodies. And so he sent out more scouts, and they reported that that continued all the way up to the crest of the Pyrenees. The Moors had decided that for the first time in the 100 years of the First Great Jihad, they had been defeated. And so they went back into Spain and never came back into Europe. But they didn't leave Spain, and so they took over as the government of Spain. That meant that the Spanish church had no real power and no real weight in the Roman Catholic Church anymore, because it was basically underground. It also meant that because the Moors did not want to have any part of what happened in Europe, that the Pope, who was trying to balance the French and the English and the Italians and the Germans, was faced with a large country, France, but he had the English on his side, or he could have the English on his side, and he had the Italians on his side. And between the Italians and the English, they could match the French. So when he needed to manage the balance of any particular question, he was able to manipulate the French, Italians, and the English, and he could balance the power and accomplish what he wanted in Europe. He didn't need the Germans. They were there, but he didn't need them. So when Huss begins to preach salvation by grace alone in the 1400s, 1410 and so forth, the Pope declares him heretic. The Pope responds to that heresy, but he doesn't care what the Germans think. So he can go into Bohemia, he can lie about what he's going to do, he can try Huss in ways that are unjust, he can not care what the Germans think, and he can tell the Germans, if you don't like it, tough, because he doesn't need them. And so if he doesn't have them on his side, he doesn't care. Now, after 1492, when Spain is unified and the Spanish church now has some influence and some power with the Roman See, now when that happens, because the French royal house and the Spanish royal house are allied by marriage, he doesn't have just France to deal with. He has France and Spain to deal with, and they have more armies and more money and more influence than the English and the Italians. So now the Pope needs the German princes on his side. So he can't go into Germany in 1517 about Luther and arrest Luther and burn Luther at the stake like he could Huss, because he needs those German princes to be on his side. And having the German princes on his side, he has to get them and convince them to burn Luther at the stake, which he's not able to do. The Germans realize they have some influence, that they have a little pull, and they're going to use it. So the Roman Catholic Pope no longer can say he rules Europe without the help of the German princes. That's a change in European politics, and a major change. Now the German princes, if they decide they want to protect Luther, and they do, they can keep Luther safe, because the Pope can't afford to alienate them completely. So now Europe has changed. And God, in his sovereign providence, has decreed that the church would revive, and he is using Luther to do that revival, and he has prepared a way for Luther to be able to bring about the Reformation, to be used by God and by his hand, bringing about that Reformation. He's changed the world so that he made the world a place where Luther can live, where Huss died. A demonstration of how God, 700 years before, had prepared the way he was going to bring about a world in which the Reformation could flourish.
And thank you for that, Jay. It's just remarkable how the Lord works through a myriad of events, and we see his faithfulness to the church in spite of man's efforts to deform the church. He raises men to reform her, to bring her back to her biblical moorings, that foundation that we have in our Lord Jesus Christ. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us here at Be Thou My Vision Radio Network. Chuck Mather here. So good to have you with us.